All right, so welcome to Bible study, everyone. Let's go ahead and just jump in. I know we're a small group today, but I think even with those that are here, we're going to have an interesting discussion because there's a lot going on in chapter 18.
Yeah, I was surprised as I read it. I said, oh, there's something else going on now, and now there's something else. I just wanted to, I could probably make comments on 4 different things, but maybe do them as they come up.
Okay.
I found it very interesting in that whole first section, the description of the hospitality.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The courtesy that you would show to a guest. I mean, they took a lot of time to explain all of that, all the things, all the steps that would be taken, all the things that would be done, the instructions to your household, what to do to make bread and to get a lamb ready and that kind of thing, and come in and let's wash your feet and that sort of thing. And I don't think he recognized the Lord at first. And he might have even just awakened. He could have been taking a nap by his tent and looks up, and here are these people who are probably above him in station anyway. So you've got the Lord in capital letters appearing, but he's addressing him as my Lord in small letters. So I don't know if that means something.
Yes. So,
okay.
All right, so let's connect these stories and then we're going to walk through them slowly. So last time, if you remember, we just got done talking about the sign of the covenant. We ended our last Bible study with talk of circumcision. We have Sarah, who has been directly brought into the covenant, but as we see, the conversation still one-on-one with Abraham and God, and now we have the official name change, so we can use the names that we're used to. So we have the covenant. We have no actual commentary between these 2 sections of like what it was like when Abram went to his household and told the men what they're gonna have to do. We have none of that commentary. We skip straight to this next story, which I don't know about you all, felt like a little bit of repetition. It feels like we get a similar story from a different tradition slammed together because they're thematically appropriate. So now we're getting like Sarah's side of things in a way. So let's talk about these 3 men walking up and what's actually going on with this dynamic, because I don't know about you, it's a little weird to start.
I read what we did 17. That's the one with the circumcision. I read 8. I started reading 18 and 19 and 20 to see if I could figure out what was going on. And I have to tell you, it was cuckoo. It's really strange stuff. And wasn't there another? Lot tries to give his daughters away to.
That was weird.
And keep going. Abraham tries to give his wife away again. I mean, it's just really strange stuff. Didn't we have that story before? Where Abraham tried to use his wife to, that was in Egypt.
Yeah. So we'll get to that one in a little bit, but it's seen as two versions of the same story, and they kept both because they're slightly different.
Yes. I have no idea what this is about.
All right. So the one language thing that Clay, you've already kind of brought up. We've gone over this a handful of times, but this is where we see like the actual application of this little rule is when you see the Lord with like the little capitalizations, remember that is the proper name of God. So that is the 4 letters that I talk about all the time, Vav, He, Ya. There's the 4 Hebrew letters that we don't have vowels for that we kind of anglicize and say Yahweh. So anytime you see those little capitals, that's the name of God. when you see the lowercase Lord, that is like my Lord, as in actually using the word for like Lord and Lady, my Lord. So you're right. When Abraham begins the conversation, Abraham's not using the name of God, but what we have in the first verse of this thing is the Lord appeared to Abraham by 3 oaks. And Abram was sitting by the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men. So with our kind of like modern senses, we don't really think of like corporeal God in scripture yet. We kind of reserve that for Jesus, but the hints here are actually saying that God is appearing in human form. The thought process of this, and I had to do a little digging because I knew that this was supposed to be God, but like the language is kind of weird. It's not like a messenger from God that we get in some other things, which implies they're angels. If you flip over to the first verse of chapter 19, you will see the 2 angels came to Sodom. And once again, language reminder, angels and messengers are the same word. So it kind of implies both meanings, that these are the messengers of God, but they are also angelic, but they're also very human. These are not like dudes with wings. These are just like 2 human looking people who are messengers, but are perceived as angelic. There is something about them. We are not given what it is that sets them apart. They may just be beautiful. But there's something about them that kind of implies they're angelic, but we're not given a description of what that is. But the inference is because specifically there's 2 angels, that means the 3rd person is literally God in human form. This is one of the times where God is directly human, or at least human appearing and walking around, which is one of the only times we get this kind of anthropomorphic God before Jesus. Like the other times we've kind of gotten these hints of like God strolling in the garden, God going here, but this is like Abraham saw 3 guys standing there.
How do we know that the 3rd one, I mean, I read that at the bottom of the page, but yeah. How does he know, how do you know that that 3rd person is different? I couldn't figure that out.
Because of the capital letters. in verse 10, the Lord said.
This is kind of inference here, reading some of the context clues, and because the 2 men kind of go off and Abraham has a direct conversation with God, it's not, I feel like it would be slightly different if it's like 3 men went off and then Abraham had a conversation with God, which would be more celestial.
All right, got it. Okay.
And this is really important, what God is about to do, to bring Abraham basically into his confidence and to pretty much announce, you're going to be the guy. So then it's an important enough event that he appears in person.
But he's done that many times before.
But not as Chris said, not always as a person, maybe more as a celestial being.
Yeah. So does it make a difference between, so like one of the first versions of the covenant, I believe that one is in the chapter 15, where God is like smoke and fire, basically. There's a dream state, there's smoke, there's fire, there's kind of this disembodied voice. We have a few dream sequences, we have conversations, but we're not given like how it looks in a way. Does it make a difference for God showing up in something that is understandable to a human?
To me, it seems pretty darn important.
Okay.
That he's done that.
Yeah, how come? Say more.
Just because he has come down as a human form and he has a few messages to bring. that are maybe too important to say in a dreamscape or something else. He's letting Sarah know she's going to have a child at her age. And then, of course, there's that whole sequence with what's going on with Sarah. And then from there, the Lord is going to say later, should I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Or should I let him know what's going on and bring him into my confidence? To me, this is pretty important stuff. And he's decided this is not going to be a burning bush or, you know, a voice from heaven or something. He's going to be right there. Maybe he's even putting his arm around Abraham's shoulder as he's talking to him. I mean, I don't know. But to me, this is pretty important that he has shown up in person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I see it, that he is there in human form.
Okay.
Yeah. Sue, what are you thinking there?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I still think it's kind of strange. I just, then God, the Lord or whatever, proceeds to do all sorts of bizarre stuff with Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, it's not exactly what I would call righteous and just. It's they're really scary stories, you know. And
But you're getting too far ahead. You're getting into the next chapter, and we're not there yet, because I also read 19 and went, oh, whoa. But I'm trying to stick with 18 before we get to Sodom and Gomorrah. And
yes,
just
I
go with
agree that
reasoning.
this probably got in human form according to the Bible. It's just,
Yeah, it's hard to stop, I know.
When people talk about like the quote unquote, like, or I've heard people say that they don't like the Old Testament God. They're okay with New Testament God. They don't like Old Testament God. I feel like it's because of stories like this that people get a little bit, I don't know if we like that old version there.
But see, I like this version between, for instance, chapters 16 and 21, whatever, when he is saying, I think I'm going to take Abraham into my confidence. I like that God.
Right.
Because he's got to get him ready to be the father of all the nations and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's choosing him, whereas I don't know about your Bible, Sue, but mine has you refer back to another chapter.
yes.
And what they're referring you back to is Noah, where God doesn't let Noah have any say in what's going on. He just comes in and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. I am going to destroy the earth. And here's how you're going to get away from it. In this one, he's bringing Abraham into his confidence.
Yes.
Yeah, so we see one of the features that is kind of brought up in this story is almost a God that's learning, which is an interesting thing. Not an all-knowing God, not a God who has everything under control, but yeah, it's like, oh, I took notes last time when I tried to destroy things, and you know, it wasn't the best. Noah had this whole episode afterwards where things kind of went sideways. So let's actually, okay, we're going to do a little bit of destruction again. We're not going to do all destruction. We're not going to do huge like world ending, but we're just going to do a little bit. Let's actually bring my chosen person in on the story. And yeah, it feels almost like we learned last time, but okay. I'm going to stick a pin in it just because I don't want to skip the conversation with Sarah, but we'll get to that kind of like what's going to happen with Sodom and Gomorrah there.
Yeah.
So are you
is learning? Could it equally well be that man is, the people are developing an idea about God?
So
the concept of what God would be like, maybe evolving. I guess I'm looking at the locus of control here, but it's hard to think of God trying to be evolving. Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So we'll hold off on that because there's this whole bartering that happens with God, which says something fascinating about how they conceive
That was
of God.
fascinating.
Yes.
So, but let's talk a little bit about custom here, because I do think the hospitality aspect of the story is
Yeah.
fascinating for a few reasons. So to talk about this, I actually want to talk about Canada. My husband loves this podcast called Risk, which is about people telling some outlandish stories about like the craziest thing that happened in their life. And we were listening to it on the road trip, and it was the story, and it sets off by saying there are places in Canada where it is illegal not to pick up hitchhikers. If you see someone on the side of the road, you are legally obligated to stop and pick them up.
Is that in more of a, like a wilderness area? There's just not much. It's like your next gas stop is 100 miles, that kind of areas.
And that's why, is because if there's someone by the side of the road, it's often that their car is broken down and they will die.
Mm-hmm.
This is the other end of the spectrum, but one reason hospitality and the desert go hand in hand in a certain point is because if you are in the desert and someone doesn't give you hospitality, there's a strong likelihood people will die.
Yes.
Okay.
So they invite the three men in and wash their feet, and that's Abraham.
Yeah.
Instructing.
So
And
this is a custom across the board, though.
I was going to say, we've heard that before.
Yes.
And everybody's wearing sandals.
But it's just the dynamic. I mean, in a way, if you think about how, the term we use is like paying it forward. If you know there's a chance you're wandering through the desert and like, who knows what's going to happen in the desert, and you want someone to take you in if you get in a hard spot, you need to take in every other person. And so that's kind of how some of these cultures of hospitality develop, is basically community welfare. If you want to be taken care of, you have to take care of people.
Yeah, I am thinking now that since I've been gardening so much, I can understand why they're always washing their feet. You really get really dirty in the desert, right? It's a lot of saying.
Yeah.
That's a very caring thing to do, is to wash people's feet.
There's the additional element is if you are in and around animals.
Oh, sure.
Animals go where they go. Animals do not use bathrooms. And if if animals go where they go, it then dries out and then it gets kicked up as dust. Dusty agricultural areas are nasty. And this is one that I learned from personal experience, because where I was living when I was studying in India, I was in a rural town with unpaved roads, and humans and animals alike just went on the side of the road. Trust me, your feet are disgusting. Absolutely. So there's actually a health thing to it, because if you have basically fecal material on your feet, you don't want to be sticking that on any kind of bedding or couch or anything. It's really gross.
Okay.
So, and I also noticed that Abraham does not wash their feet. He just says, let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree.
Oh.
So he's not doing it for them. I think that is, and I think a reason for that would be that is a really special thing if you're going to wash someone else's feet. So this apparently just isn't, if he had recognized it was the Lord, would he have washed his feet?
So this is one where I think our New Testament understanding kind of seeps backwards, because we think of the woman who cleaned Jesus's feet with her hair.
Yeah.
That is very unusual. You wash your own darn feet.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, like it is
like washing your own hands and yeah.
Right. It actually is fairly uncommon for other people to have their feet washed, or you washing others' feet. That's why it is such a big act, both when Jesus has it done to him and then when Jesus does it, is because that then dirties you. If you think, I mean, like we have the modern understanding of like the Indian caste system. These things were not unusual in the ancient world, if you are dealing with dirty things, you're kind of just seen as a dirty person. And so washing someone's feet is a very dirty thing, and it kind of would be like transferring that dirtiness to yourself. So people can just wash your own darn feet.
Okay.
So that's actually not being disrespectful. I think that is more just common. But what's interesting is seeing the difference between what Abraham offers and what he actually gives. Because he says, oh, let me give a little water and just like a little bread. We're just going to refresh you. And then he like runs to Sarah and says, like, we're not just going to make bread. We're going to make cakes. We're going to kill the calf. It's going to be tender meat. We're going to cook it, not just in water. Bring out the curds, bring out the milk. Abraham just prepared a feast. This is also custom here. This is a sign of humbleness, of like, oh, you condescend to your servant here. I but have a meager portion, and then you're very generous. This is like social flex, not flexing, but you portray humbleness and then you give generously, and that is partially custom, but is seen as like the good way to do it, because you don't want to brag about having a feast, but you also want to lavish on your guests. So you kind of, it's self-deprecating in a way, but in a very polite self-deprecating.
And I noticed he also doesn't eat with them.
Mm-mm.
He stands by. So is that more respect for your guests, or?
Yes. This is also something I've witnessed, which is really was weird for me to have happened, of when you are served food by your host and they watch you eat it, because they're attending to your needs. And if you don't like it, they'll change it out or whatnot. They want to make sure you're enjoying it. It's not for them necessarily to share, but yeah, is standing by and watching his guests eat because it's about them. So we have all these social customs, and I'm looking from the context clues. It seems like they may still be in the outside, which is interesting. At any rate, because Abraham's standing by the tree, at any rate. So any other questions about some of these social customs that are a bit out of our realm of familiarity? Okay.
We'd heard about these kinds of things before. I'd just never seen this much.
Yeah.
So it was very, very interesting.
I mean, I feel like this is one of the points where Larry would say like, oh, they kept the details. Why'd they keep the details about what they ate specifically and how they did it? And
I think because it's such a big deal. It's just, this is really a big deal, what's going on in this chapter. So I think maybe that's just to emphasize.
So one of the things in recording Abraham's manners are akin to righteousness. So this is almost displaying that, oh, God made the right choice. Look at his manners. Look at how he responds. This guy is righteous. Look, he's doing exactly what he's supposed to. He's not skimping. He is not being braggadocious about it. He is righteous. Look at how he serves God in this situation. So then it flips down to talk about Sarah, who, I mean, the conversation's about her, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna come back through here and she's gonna have a child. So Abraham's been told this. Abraham's been told she's gonna bear a child, but here Sarah is like doing things in the kitchen, in the tent when they're outside, and she hears them talk. And she's seemingly muttering to herself. She is eavesdropping, doesn't think she's being heard. But the funny part is that God is also eavesdropping on her.
Yeah, he's on. Yeah. Well, when I read that part, I thought, I think I would have reacted the same way. I would have just gone,
Yeah.
huh, what are you, nuts? You know, maybe to myself, not knowing that anyone else would be hearing that, but I think that's a natural reaction, that she's not laughing to be laughing in God's face. She's just like, huh, you gotta be kidding me type of reaction. But as you say, I mean, he's everywhere. So he, of course, knows what her reaction is, and actually calls her on it and says, oh yeah, you did laugh. No, I didn't. Oh yeah, you did. And my book indicates that she denied it because she was afraid. But I think she just denied it because she denied it. It's like, oh no, I didn't. You couldn't have heard that.
Almost the like caught off guard kind of like, oh,
Right,
no,
right.
no, what?
But I think I would have reacted the same way with a guffaw or a laugh to myself for that situation.
So this is one where we start to see the interaction and the indication that one of these three is the Lord. Because it seems like part of this conversation is with the angels. The angels are kind of being the ones that are saying like, oh, when we come back through, there's going to be a child. Sarah laughs, and it seems like it is not just like omnipotent voice saying this thing, but one of the three at the thing being like, oh, Sarah, I heard you, kind of a thing. And like calling her out from the tent, like literally calling out. And so she's being brought out in front of the three guests and Abraham, like, oh, why'd you laugh? Why'd you laugh? Is this too much for you, hon?
But it also says, you know, is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return. So he's putting himself right out there. You know, I am the Lord.
Right. So how does this sound in the after, like this is, that comment, is anything too hard for the Lord, is coming after the whole shaboodle with Ishmael and Hagar.
Yes.
Right.
How does it sound in that context, knowing that like Sarah's already tried to like get her way in kind of a not straightforward means kind of a way of, I mean, it, at least to me, it almost sounds like God's chiding her, like, hey, you've already tried this and it didn't work out. Is it too hard for me to do it?
Yeah. He's pretty much called her on it.
And so here we don't have her child being named in this one. In the previous chapter, we see that Abraham laughs. Where it is that chapter 17, verse 17, and then then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said, can a child be born to a man 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? So they both have the same reaction of like, ha! But in this version, it's Sarah that's laughing and not Abraham.
Right. And they've both gone to all that trouble to have another child. So, wow. Yeah, this would be really dropping a bomb.
Is there something about Isaac, the name Isaac meaning he who laughed?
Yeah.
Or something? Okay.
Yeah, Isaac basically means laughter. And so now both of his parents have laughed at the idea of him even existing. So, so the one last parallel that's just kind of interesting here is, once again, thinking about the start of all of this in the Garden of Eden, of God saying like, Eve, did you eat of the apple? And she goes, the snake made me, or like first Adam saying like, Eve made me do it. And then Eve going, the snake made me do it. And here we have a similar like, Sarah, did you do the thing? And she's like, no, I promise I didn't. But he actually doesn't, God doesn't hold it against her this time. Just says, no, you laughed.
Yeah, it's kind of that's the end of the conversation.
Right. And so from there, that concludes all the preamble for Abraham having a child. that is like the last affirmation of the covenant. There's no actually like covenant language here, but that kind of wraps up this section that I feel like we've been like hitting again and again and again, is all this conversation about Abraham, you're going to be a dad, you're going to be a father of nations. Abraham, here's your land. Abraham, make this promise, again and again and again. And this is kind of the last piece. We have Sarah kind of brought into it, and now Sarah very directly is brought into it. She's heard it herself. She's kind of been verbally affirmed by God that this is going to happen with her. And we're going to get this kind of side story, and then we're going to come back to the story. But by, let's see, where is it? By chapter 21, we have a few chapters of side story in the middle, but we're going to come back and she's going to have a kid.
Oh, yeah. That's the first sentence. Yeah.
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 So
I thought by abruptly changing, and just in 16, then the men set out. They're kind of leaving, the Lord's leaving Sarah behind to really think about what just happened, because she's now all alone and those guys are gone. And it's like, and I was thinking to myself, now she has a chance to reflect on what the heck just happened. And
that's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah. But we do have that like hard line here in the story. Always remember that the verse numbers and the chapter divisions were added in the Middle Ages. So we're just kind of going with the Middle Age breakup of the story. But here is like a hard transition. We had the introduction of the angels for that story, but this is a transition to dealing with a different issue that we're gonna be in this realm for a little bit.
okay.
And so we have the men setting out for Sodom. And I'm actually gonna pause here because Sodom and Gomorrah have a lot of cultural weight and kind of a common understanding of what the story is about. And I feel like our cultural understanding is not actually what's on the page. So I want to take a moment and just hear some of the ways that we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, just so we put it on the table before we actually get to the subject itself and see what's actually in the text. What are some of our associations with Sodom and Gomorrah? How is it talked about? How have you heard it talked about, at least?
Wickedness.
Okay.
That's always been my word for Sodom and Gomorrah. It was destroyed because they were wicked. And I always thought of it as kind of like the guy just giving his 2 daughters away. That it was that kind of shenanigans going on.
But for some reason, Lot doesn't like the idea that they're going to do that. So he's having this whole discussion about what can we do to save the people who didn't do anything wrong, which is a very legitimate question. So I don't remember that part of the story before, but they're wicked, but is everybody wicked? Does everybody deserve to be burned up?
Right. There's like this conversation about justice in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, that's with Abraham, though, that he's talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the end of 18.
So what are some of the other like cultural associations? Why, in just like our modern kind of telling of it, why do we say that? Or is there anything specific that Sodom and Gomorrah is picked on about, whether you believe it or not, just things that you've heard before?
I think there was some sexual problems. There were, it was, but I don't think that's any place in the Bible, but it was immoral stuff. But they were doing that stuff all the time, giving their wives away. I don't know. But it probably wasn't worshiping false gods, because that hadn't really been established yet. But it was bad stuff.
Yeah.
Probably if there's an outcry from the people, it would have to do also with food, maybe, and money and all that.
Right.
But we don't know. I mean, it doesn't say, does it? They're just wicked.
So we will get some interpretation here, and some of the interpretation comes by context and contrast. Some of the interpretation we actually get later in the Old Testament. There's actually one verse in particular that I forget which book it's about, which book it's in, but it specifically states at least the ancient interpretation of why Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. A lot of people, or the one that I've heard a lot of, and I don't know if this is generationally or what have you, is there are people who connect it with the people who think being gay is a sin will point to this. And I just wanted to put it on the table that that is a very common interpretation. And we're going to talk about its actual basis and what actually is going on here. Why is Sodom seen as so bad that that it's being wiped off the map? Notably, we don't really get much talk about Gomorrah. Gomorrah is just kind of, it's paired with Sodom, but Sodom is the only one we have this like individual interaction with. Reminder that we actually don't know where these cities are. There is evidence that, like, extra biblical evidence that at least Sodom did exist, and there was a city that was destroyed. We just have no real clue where it is. A lot of people think that this is around the Dead Sea just because of the discussion of salt. Leads people to think about the masses of salt that develop around the Dead Sea. We don't actually know, though. So with that, a little bit of context, let's actually jump into the kind of the introduction to Sodom and Gomorrah before we hit the actual what's going to happen in the city itself. So it starts off with kind of we have them setting out, and we have the Lord, or the Lord God, talking to basically himself, it almost seems. The assumption is kind of maybe the two guys are part of the heavenly court, but this kind of reads like an internal monologue, basically saying, shall I hide what I'm about to do from Abram? No, I've chosen him. Let's actually bring him into the plan. Like, why is this for God's benefit? Does God need to talk about the plan, or is it because God wants to hear Abram's advice? Is it a test? Because that's one of the other things that you will read in the commentary sometimes it's a common interpretive strategy. When Jesus seems to change his mind, when God seems to change his mind, people are like, oh no, God knew what God was going to do. This was just a test for the human to make sure they gave the right answer. I don't think that's likely. It actually sounds like God is in this discussion, honestly, at least to me, because of the waffling of like, should I bring Abram in? Let's actually talk through this with Abraham. So what does that make you all feel or think that God has this kind of negotiating quality in this story?
I think it kind of goes back to the Noah thing, that he didn't bring Noah in on it and just went ahead and destroyed everything, and that he's thinking that didn't go real well. So maybe since this is going to be the big thing going forward, is Abraham and all the nations, I should bring him in on this. So I kind of like that internal dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting when we pit two ideas against each other. The first idea is God changeable? Can God's opinion change? Which, if we pray, there's a certain amount where we kind of hope that God is changeable or moldable. We ask for things. We ask for peace or healing, or for God to act, for God to be present. We ask for all these things. You kind of don't get there unless there is something that like we can influence God. But where that goes into like weird and kind of scary territory for people is well, if God is changeable, does that mean God is not perfect?
Or is that part of the perfection that you can listen and change?
It's we may think of God now as not changeable, but I think then it was a more intimate kind of relationship where they really talked about stuff. But it didn't really go anyplace. Where they have that whole discussion about how many people you have to find that were righteous in order for you to not do it. But then he does it anyway. So I was puzzled by that.
I know. There's a reason for that section.
Righteous.
I think there's a whole reason for that section. I really enjoyed reading that whole section that begins with what, 23 all the way to 33. I found that really interesting, where, Abraham says, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And he starts with 50. But instead of going directly down to, well, what if there were only 10? He does it in sections by tens. I found that fascinating, to go down and ask the Lord with each, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. And I just found that really interesting. Would the Lord have responded differently if Abraham had just gone from 50 and then to 10? What if there were only 10? Would the Lord have responded differently? Instead, it's as though he's kind of leading him along with them. I don't know how to take this, because you think of the Lord as just all-knowing and he's got his decisions and this is how it's going to be. And yet Abraham seems to bring him along to these decisions. I found this part really fascinating. Psychologically.
Right. I mean, yeah, the psychology of it, like, okay, so we can agree, like 50 people, that's an inordinate amount of good people to kill, right?
Yeah.
But the first one he goes down is 45. He starts, he goes 50, 45, 40, 30, 20. And it's like, we can agree that this is bad. We can agree that this is bad. And so there's like the morality of like gathering consensus of like, yeah, this is going to be bad. Right?
Yeah. Very, very interesting. I actually was reading this morning and I just went, oh, that's pretty cool. That's almost like child psychology. It's almost like if all the other kids are doing it, are you going to do it too? It's almost, I know it's kind of a weird way to think of it, but this is just to me was just really interesting to do it this way.
There is one more element though. This is a culture that loves to barter. I have it also in my notes here.
Negotiating.
That literally he's bartering with God. Like, okay, what about this price, God?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because we talk about bartering, some discussions of prayer, once again, when we talk with God, you have, especially when people are in hard situations, you have the like, oh, I'll be a good person the rest of my life if only you get me out of this situation. You have that like bartering tendency, and we still do it where we want to leverage something, that it's like, God, if I can just get through this test, I'll start attending church every week, I'll be good, I'll follow the rules, just get me out of this bad, like we do it today.
Oh, yeah. Give me this parking space that I need, and I'll do anything you want. Yeah, but the idea, and of course, I didn't think about this until I looked at what was written down below, that the ancient Israeli thought, with its strong sense of communal solidarity, held that the wickedness of a few contaminates the whole community. So here the issue is put the other way around. can the righteous of a few, even as few as 10, have a saving influence on the whole group? And that's then how he's doing the negotiating. He's bringing it down to, I don't know if 10 is an important number in the Bible. I know 7 is. I'm surprised he didn't go down to 7, because that's such an important number. But bringing it down in that way, he's reversed the argument. How few do we need to be righteous in order to save the whole group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So this bartering is taking place. And the thing is, God seems to agree to it. Like, if there's 10 righteous people, yeah, sure. I'm not going to destroy the city for 10.
I was really surprised at the agreement, not at the beginning where the numbers were higher, but as the numbers got lower, let not Lord, for the sake of 20, and then let not the Lord be angry, but I'm going to try one more time. How about 10? Again, I found this whole section really fascinating.
So here's the thing that Sue was bringing up. The city still gets destroyed.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. And I read ahead to see, because I know the city gets destroyed. So I wanted to see what else might be said about those 10.
But that's just it.
It never happened.
Yeah.
No, or it's saying something. If you
Mhm.
only need 10 and the city won't be destroyed, and the city gets destroyed, that by implication, that means
There weren't 10.
there were not even 10 righteous people.
Oh,
It was mainly just Lot and take the wife and the 2 daughters and get the heck out of here. So that's only 4 people.
By ancient counting, that's only one person, unfortunately.
Oh, because it's just Lot and his family. So it's
Well-
Plus family.
Lot plus family. So yes, and so I kept reading just to see, and I thought, oh, well, he destroys it and he only lets the one go. So
well, on basis, does he decide that Lot is righteous is just beyond me. I mean, this is a man who offers his daughters.
but he offered his daughters in hospitality. Again, I'm reading down below because that dumbfounded me also. When I read down below,
Right.
it said, oops, on the wrong page. It
The
said
Lord-
that once the guests have eaten in his house, Lot had to obey the law of Oriental hospitality, which guaranteed protection. Thus, his proposal to hand over his daughters is showing that he's putting his obligation as a host first to
Oh,
protect the guests. I had to go down and read that, and I went, oh, okay.
This is why what the next chapter, there is a list of Bible passages that are collectively known as the text of terror. And there's a lot of them in Genesis. And this is really the first one that we see that is, especially to our modern senses, is truly both terrifying and terrible.
Mhm.
And there is explanation for why this is done, even in ancient sense. This is not necessarily normal, even in an ancient sense. It is a last desperate hope of doing something, but this is the reality of it. And this is one thing that I know some people who want to explain away all the bad text in the Bible and give context and say why it wasn't so bad. Sometimes I think we need to sit with the awful and the uncomfortable, and this is one of them where it's awful and uncomfortable and terrible. And I don't think we can explain away the fact that women were viewed as less, that putting the daughters forward was because they were kind of considered property. They were not seen as fully human. And there's no easy way around that fact in this story.
mhm,
And I think it's better to just sit with that.
mhm,
Right.
mhm.
But at least that gave me an explanation of
Yeah.
why he would do that, and it was the last desperate act. And this whole destruction thing, I mean, we'll get into that next time, but this whole destruction thing is going to leave a huge impact on the Israelites as they go forward.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like, whoa, remember Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, let's see, we haven't had Moses yet, so we don't have the commandments, but this is sort of like they're making it up as they went along, right? They haven't gotten to the point where it's not okay to kill people.
So that is the one actually. I believe don't kill is in the Noetic covenant, as it's called. It's like the one rule that Noah has is like don't kill people.
Oh, okay.
So that is kind of your baseline morality. That is the one thing that, I mean, across most cultures across the world, everyone basically has a don't murder. Now there's always clauses around the like who does and does not count in the idea of don't murder. War is generally considered outside of the don't murder clause. There is also, it's more like don't murder your own people, but most everyone agrees don't murder, which is just like even in a strictly biological sense, it's just good for the species. Don't kill each other. And so, yes, these, there is number one, that thing that's kind of agreed upon across humanity, that is a morality breach. But here we kind of see an implicit morality, that like there's kind of an assumption that these people are breaking rules, even if they haven't fully been spelled out, even in the context of the Bible, because the people that were killed in the flood were seen as immoral. They're not following the rules. There is an argument to say that the commandments and the Torah and the law in general is actually more a response because people are having such a hard time not being bad, that God's like, fine, I'll write it out for you. Do you need me to spell it out for you? I will spell it out for you, because you guys can't get it right. What are you doing being terrible to each other? So it's almost like the laws are almost a response to the fact that humanity can't seem to get their act together. And this is not the first occasion that we're seeing this, of like, these people are being terrible to each other. So.
Okay. Well, there still is a lot of killing going on.
Even today, we still have laws against don't kill each other, respect each other, don't make each other's lives awful.
And it's except unless you decide somebody's a bad person.
Yeah.
Like a comment or something.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it turns out you can make rules and people still don't follow them. So
that's right.
Be that what it may. So we have this kind of bartering discussion, and at least this section ends with God saying, okay, for 10 people, not going to destroy the city. And like the two angels are kind of sent off on their own. We don't really have an indication of where the third person, who is assumed to be God, is in this situation. But we then see Abraham, after God kind of agrees to like baseline 10 moral people, everything will be good. And then Abraham just returns to his place and kind of is not present in the next part of the story. So Abraham's like, okay, I tried to barter for Lot. I tried my best. Notably, Lot's been in Sodom before. Remember, he had to be rescued when Sodom was attacked. Evidently, he went back to Sodom, which is interesting. So it's the continuation of these stories is always interesting, of how they're linking them together. So this is assuming that Lot is back where he chose to be, or maybe went back there after he was uncaptured, rescued. But Abraham seems to acknowledge, or there's probably the assumption that like Abraham knows his nephew's down there. But this is also once again seen as kind of like Abraham being righteous. He's arguing for this, like the saving of, like, he's not just going to God saying like, oh, please save my nephew. Can you get Lot and his family out of here? He's arguing for the saving of an entire town, which is once again kind of like showing Abraham to be the right choice of a patriarch. Like God chose this guy as a patriarch, and look, he is arguing not just for his own protection or the protection of his family, he's arguing for the protection of an entire city. Look how righteous this guy is.
Well, and also that he can think and make decisions for the future.
Yeah.
That if this is his thought process with the Lord, he'll be doing this kind of thought process later when he is in charge of all the nations.
Yeah. Yeah. So any final thoughts for today about kind of an introduction to a weird story?
Just it was interesting.
Well, I'm hoping that we will get some explanation about all this as we go along.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be gone though, aren't you, Sue? You said the first 2 weeks of August.
Yeah,
So you will not be here next week.
well, the first week we don't have it, right?
Right.
That's right. We don't have it next Wednesday.
I'm going to miss one, and it's
You're going to miss
possible.
19. You're
I
going to miss
tune in.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Depends
Good
on
thing
what's
they're
going.
all recorded.
Yeah, and it's recorded, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have something to go to that next, what is it, the 10th? I have a social to go to that's out in Davisburg. So I probably, unless I listen in my car,
Okay.
I probably would not be in on that one.
Okay. So I'll send some messages around, because if there's only, depending on the critical
I'm
mass
sorry.
we have,
That's a Wednesday. That's the different group. I will be around that Tuesday. I'm sorry.
okay.
The
So I
9th.
want to make sure there's enough people around to have a
Yeah,
discussion.
I will be
because-
around on the 9th. I'm sorry.
Okay, cool. So we're not having our study next week, but the week after we'll go into this. I'm going to try to pull out some resources about this story, because this is one, I mean, kind of like we mentioned earlier, that like there is a lot, this is a story that's told a lot, not necessarily in Sunday school. It's not, or at least I hope this isn't being told in Sunday school, but it's a story that is very culturally loaded for various reasons. And I would, the interpretation that I brought up is actually a fairly recent one. And so I want to see if I can dig up some of the understandings through history of how this has been used. But one of the things I am going to talk about is how this story was used to understand Hurricane Katrina, because this is one of them that got applied there. It's been applied through history. It is this really famous story, and its application is so strange. And so I want to go through not just the bits and the pieces of what actually happens, and as we see in the text, but kind of how it's being used. Because I think we kind of need to know the history of the usage of it, not just like what's on the page. This is one that I want us to be acknowledge the loadedness of the story. Because certain scriptures just get tossed around and sometimes willfully misinterpreted, and sometimes just casually misinterpreted and then pass down the misinterpretation of it. So we'll do that next time.
Are you saying that this was used to explain why Hurricane Katrina destroyed so much? That is a pretty evil interpretation.
Yeah, that New Orleans and the surrounding area was, wicked.
Yeah.
That's really, yeah.
Yeah, it's the unfortunately common interpretation that's applied to a lot of natural disasters through history. This is one that goes back to again and again and again. It's like, oh, that place got destroyed because that was God's condemnation. And that's not just like a Christian interpretation. Lots of different religions went to that explanation. But it's interesting in our modern sense, when we do have an understanding of weather, every time that argument comes out again. And it kind of goes back to this.
Well, there must be an increase in the number of evil people. Must be huge right now, which it probably is. But it's a way of explaining why bad things happen,
It
so that we
is.
have a sense of control over our world. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
I know that about Hurricane Katrina. That's really,
Yeah,
Mm.
I mean, that's the question humans go back to again and again and again, is making sense of chaos in a chaotic world. When you supposedly believe in a God who is in control, how can these chaotic things happen? And the interpretation goes, well, if God's in control, that means God did it. We need an explanation why God did it. So,
okay.
but we're going to discuss that in depth later. So, and I'm going to try to bring out some resources ahead of time, because I will send them out. If I have some classical interpretations, I'm going to try to like send copies ahead of time. So look out for that email. But seeing that it is 11 o'clock, let us close with a word of prayer. God, we come to you in prayer, hoping that, yes, in some ways that you're listening, that you're eavesdropping on our conversations and on our thoughts, and that you know the things that we're thinking and feeling even before we even say them, and that you know what we need. Deep down inside, we also hope that there's something about our needs and our wants that has influence on the world, whether it is influence on you in you hearing the cries of our hearts, or influence somewhere else in a way that we can't understand. But we do rely on you, and we trust that you are good and that you are loving, because God, stories like this scare us to our core, that there might be chaos in the world that is not in our control. It scares us to think of something with a divine force that is so powerful being used for destruction, Lord. So, Lord, in this world that does feel chaotic, that does feel like there's bad things that we're reading all over the place, give us peace that you are here with us and you hear the cries of our hearts and that you work for justice. But also give us the courage to speak out, to barter even with you for what we see as just, so that we may have confidence to barter for what is just with the people who do have influence in the world, that we might even see the influence of 10 righteous people, even 10 in the whole world, make an effect and a splash that we feel for generations, that we might be drawn to you and create a world that is a place of love and compassion that you designed it to be. So we pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.
All right.
All right. Well,
enjoy your day.
Yeah, you all take care, and I'll see you, if not online, then in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Right,
Bye.
take care, everyone.
Goodbye.